Former Chief of Indian Navy, Admiral Arun Prakash served India as the 18th Naval Chief and Chairman Chiefs of Staff Committee. Specialized naval aviator, in his career of 40 years, he commanded carrier-borne fighter squadron, naval air station and 4 warships including aircraft carrier INS Virat, and has logged 2,500 hours on fighters, patrol aircraft and helicopters. In flag rank, he commanded Eastern Fleet, National Defense Academy and Western Naval Command, becoming the first C-in-C of Andaman and Nicobar, joined command in 2001. He headed Navy's aviation and personnel branches and served as Vice Chief of Naval Staff before taking over as Naval Chief from July 2004 to October 2006. During his tenure as chief, many initiatives were launched in fields of doctrine, strategy, maritime cooperation and indigenization. Graduate of IAF Test Pilot School, Defense Services Staff College and US Naval War College, he was decorated with Veer Chakra during the 1971 war. Post-retirement, he served twice as member of NSA Board and was chairman of National Maritime Foundation. Currently, patron of Maritime History Society, he chairs Naval War College, Goa. He speaks and writes on strategy and defense and published compendium of writings titled From the Crow's Nest. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Gentleman to the Core, pride of our armed forces and nation, Admiral Arun Prakash.
Please escort our honored guest to the dais. Welcome, sir. We are running a bit late. Apologies, but we will relieve you before you have to leave. A big honor for us to have such a highly decorated forces ex-naval chief of the Indian Navy, highly decorated amidst us this afternoon. He is going to speak to us on Indian maritime security. All yours, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me start by thanking District Governor Harjeet Talwar for having given me the privilege of participating in this conclave of District 3141. One has always admired the noble spirit that drives Rotary International in its endeavors to provide humanitarian service, encourage ethical practices, and build goodwill. This morning has been an eye-opener for me, hearing these tales of human endeavor by men and women and organizations in the service of humanity. It's been really inspiring, and I'm delighted to have been here to participate with you in this morning's function. What I'm going to speak about is something quite different. You heard inspiring tales of human endeavor. You heard the general speaking about leadership. I'm going to speak about something connected with the seas, and I hope this will be of some interest because Mumbai is a great port city of this country. You all live by the sea. You also heard about the hazards of the sea from the general. He said sea levels are rising and Mumbai may stand in great danger one of these days. But let me start with history. In 1498, when the Portuguese adventurer Vasco da Gama dropped anchor off Calicut, there was no one to oppose him. The Sultanate of Delhi was ruled by the Afghans. South India was divided between the Bahmani and Vijayanagaram kingdoms, and no one had any idea about a navy or maritime security and so on. The Portuguese were followed by the French, the British and the Dutch, and all of them came by sea. That's the point I'm going to hammer home again. They came as traders, but strayed on to colonize us, to exploit our people and take home our wealth for their prosperity. There was profound irony here because India has a rich and ancient maritime tradition which had nurtured bold seafaring enterprises for centuries, both in the western and the eastern seaboard. From the 5th century onwards, for about 1500 years, naval supremacy rested with the powers of peninsular India, starting with the Maurya dynasty There were successive rulers like the Andhras, the Pallavas, Pandavas, Cholas, who maintained powerful navies. But in the 11th century, however, there was a prolonged conflict between the navies of the Buddhist Srivijaya Empire, which ruled over Sumatra, also of Indian origin, and the Indian Empire ruled by the Cholas. These two went into a great conflict lasting about 90 years, and both of them destroyed each other, with the result that maritime power passed into the hands of the Arabs. Today, an Indian traveling anywhere across Southeast Asia, many of you must have gone for holidays to Thailand, Cambodia, and so on, you are often surprised by the overwhelming evidence of Indian culture in this region. In monuments, in carvings, in paintings all over Indonesia, Thailand, and Cambodia, you come across recurrent themes from the Ramayana, Mahabharata, and distinct influence of Indian art and culture on these countries. They were incidentally known as Swarna Bhumi in the ancient times. Please note that the state emblems of both Indonesia and Thailand incorporate the Garud, which is a mythological bird from Hindu mythology. So how did these deep cultural linkages come about on foreign soil so far away from home? The answer, of course, is that amongst our ancestors, there were many bold and enterprising seafarers who for thousands of years braved the stormy seas of the Bay of Bengal and carried in their ships traders, religious teachers, artisans who actually spread our culture and heritage in all these countries. In our later maritime history, there are, of course, two bright spots and which we must recall and cherish. One was the era of the 16th century Zamarins of Calicut. When Vasco da Gama landed, which I just showed you the slide, he was not opposed by anyone, but in a few years, the Zamarin of Calicut, who was assisted by legendary admirals of the Marakar clan, Kunjali Marakas, they put up a fierce fight again and drove the Portuguese out of Malabar up to Goa. A century later, with the Mughal Empire in decline and the British, French, and Portuguese jockeying for supremacy, it was the Marathas who clearly foresaw that control of the seas would be critical in the conflict that was obviously forthcoming. The foundations of a Maratha navy were laid by Shivaji in the mid-17th century, and he created a fleet by building and also built forts all along the Konkan coast. At the time of Shivaji's crowning as Chhatrapati, the Maratha navy had become a sizable force, enabling his legacy to be carried forward by Kanoji Angre, who was known as Sir Khel or Admiral in those days. Today's Indian Navy is the successor and offspring of the Maratha Navy, from which we draw our legacy and inspiration. The memory of Angre, Zamarin, and the Marakars has been preserved by naming naval establishments, one in Bombay, one in Cochin, and one in Ezimala. Now, to sum up, let me remind this gathering of distinguished Rotarians that India, notwithstanding its rich maritime heritage, lost its freedom and became a colony for four main reasons. One, the absence of strategic leadership. Two, the lack of unity and internal strife. Three, our technological backwardness, because the Europeans who came to overpower us owned much better technology. Their guns, their armaments were better than ours. And lastly, a lack of maritime power and what we in the Navy call sea blindness. Sea blindness, ladies and gentlemen, is a syndrome that has not only made Indians forget their glorious maritime past, but also led us to ignore the significance of the seas in our nation's destiny, and that's something that I'll be talking more about. Our post-independence decision makers clung stubbornly to the belief that since all invasions had come from our mountain passes, then India was and must remain a continental power which was focused on the Himalayas for its defense. The focus thus remained largely on our land borders, and India's maritime security suffered sustained neglect for many centuries. Coming to the present times, one of the most serious manifestations of our malady of sea blindness was the terrible ordeal suffered by this great city of Mumbai 12 years ago on the 26th of November 2008. Some of you may have been present in the city. During a 4-day siege, a 10-member terror squad of the Pakistani-based Lashkar-e-Taiba carried out coordinated attacks, shooting, bombing all across the city, killing 170 and injuring over 300 Indians and foreigners. Now, these terrorists came by sea from Karachi in a boat. On the way, they hijacked an Indian trawler, killed his crew, then came to Mumbai harbor, where they transferred to a rubber dinghy and landed all across the Colaba coastline. They came by sea, and our coastline was not defended. Apart from the sad loss of life and the psychological trauma of this terror attack, it revealed the poor state of our intelligence, the gaps in our ocean surveillance, and the huge challenge of effectively policing and guarding our long and vulnerable coast. Our coastline is 7,500 kilometers, and it runs right around the peninsula. But it is often forgotten that we had received clear warnings about the vulnerability of our coast 15 years before 26/11. On 12th March 1993, not many of you were possibly present, Mumbai was devastated by 13 bomb attacks, killing 250 and injuring over 1,400 people. The cause of these bomb blasts was tons of explosives which came from Ratnagiri down the coast. They were landed there by the Pakistanis and brought to Mumbai by the local mafia. So this was a warning given to us 15 years ago, but we did little about it. Returning to sea blindness, the onset of independence did little to diminish this affliction. The young Indian Navy remained on small shoestring budgets. It still does, and you'll hear the present Navy chief complaining about it. This went on till the 1971 Indo-Pakistani War. In the war, the Navy was fortunate that it was able to demonstrate how a Navy could contribute to national interest, to national defense, and the surrender of Pakistani forces and the creation of Bangladesh owes a great deal to what the Indian Navy did. The Navy deployed the full spectrum of its capabilities: aircraft carrier, air power, missile warfare, submarine and anti-submarine warfare, amphibious warfare, and so on. The war brought home to India's people and to our political leadership that the critical role that could be played by a competent Navy and in furthering national interests. The 1980s saw, consequent to this war, a noteworthy paradigm shift wherein the Navy's strength was augmented after a long time, and the Navy was deployed in neighboring countries in Sri Lanka. Those of you who remember, in Maldives, we saved the government of Maldives from a great misfortune, and we started building up the Navy. We saw a new aircraft carrier join the fleet. A nuclear submarine was taken on lease from Russia, a squadron of reconnaissance aircraft, and new submarines and ships joined us in quick succession. Then came the great tsunami of 2004. This marked another defining moment which established our Navy as a credible regional force. Our ships were sailed within hours and rendered assistance not only to our own citizens in distress on the East Coast, but we also went to Sri Lanka, to Maldives, to Indonesia to render assistance to them. After that, the Navy has periodically been responding to calls for humanitarian assistance from countries as far apart as Mauritius, Myanmar, Lebanon, Libya, Mozambique, and so on. 4 years after the tsunami came the great Wall Street crash of 2008, whose impact clearly proved that the world was interlocked in a phenomenon called globalization. And globalization, ladies and gentlemen, depends on international trade, and 95% of international trade travels by ship, container ships, tankers, gas carriers, car ferries, and so on. This was also accompanied by the phenomenon of piracy in Somalia, which demonstrated that merchant shipping was vulnerable to terrorists, to pirates who could hijack ships, hold the crews to ransom, and so on, and we paid a heavy price for that. So all these issues combined to once again remind our decision makers of the importance of the seas and what the role that the Navy could play. Now let me just briefly tell you the kind of dependence that we have on the seas around us. India occupies a dominant position on the Indian Ocean. This peninsula juts out 1,000 kilometers into the sea. We have islands on both our coastlines, international shipping lanes run right at the feet of India, so to speak. The waters of the Indian Ocean see over 100,000 merchantmen in transit annually, and cargo and oil and natural gas worth trillions of dollars travels by these sea lanes. Any interruption of this seaborne traffic will impact not only India, but also the world economy. Now, while the strategic importance of the Indian Ocean is quite clear because we lie in a strategic point, we also have serious interests in the Pacific to our east. Almost 55% of our trade with Asia Pacific goes through the South China Sea, about which you hear and read so much these days. ONGC, our Oil and Natural Gas Commission, has acquired many interests in the South China Sea and Pacific, in Vietnam and Indonesia, off Australia, in the Russian Far East. So the point is that we have interests in the Indian Ocean, but we also have interests in the Pacific. In the 1990s, you heard India launched the Look East policy, which was upgraded to Act East policy and so on. We've tried to reach out to many countries in the Pacific, to Indonesia, to Vietnam and so on, because we have common interests in the safety of the sea lanes. Today, we have large trading interests, we have a large diaspora which is settled there, and their looking after their interests once again falls on the shoulders of the Indian Navy. But moving ahead, let me briefly focus on China, which is of great interest and concern to us. China is even more dependent on the seas than we are. Their economy depends on energy which comes from the Persian Gulf. Their economy relies on exports and imports, and therefore the sea lanes are of vital interest to China. In 2002, the Chinese President Hu Jintao had spoken about something he called the Malacca Dilemma. The Malacca Dilemma meant that since Chinese shipping passed through the Malacca Straits and India is much closer to Malacca than China, then we could interrupt their trade, and he expressed it as the Malacca Dilemma. His articulation of this concern about Malacca Straits led to a great evolution of the PLA Navy. They created something known as a string of pearls, about which you must have heard, by creating not bases, but at least places in our neighborhood, in fact, all around India. And with the subsequent launch of the Belt and Road Initiative, China has embarked on a very ambitious maritime agenda that will create a seamless swath of geopolitical influence right around India, and that's something that makes us quite concerned. There are two issues which we must know about. On either side of India, on both flanks, to our west, they've created something called the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. To our east, they've created the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. Both of them connect provinces of mainland China to the Indian Ocean, one to the Bay of Bengal and the other to the Arabian Sea. The idea is to bypass the Malacca Strait and take trade and energy straight from these two corridors. So these are areas of serious concern to us. After Hu Jintao's warning about the Malacca Dilemma, the current President Xi Jinping launched a great naval building program, and because of this, this is of course China's new base in Djibouti and in the Red Sea. China has embarked on a great shipbuilding and naval, adding to the naval assets now. They have the largest merchant navy in the world. They have the biggest coast guard in the world. Their fishing fleet is huge, and the Navy is about to catch up, at least in numbers, if not in capability, with the United States Navy. So very soon, the Chinese maritime power will really be something to worry about. And the other source of worry is that Pakistan has been enlisted as a cat's paw by China, and it constitutes an integral part of China's foreign and security policies. China has been deploying its submarines in our neighborhood, and starting in 2013-14, and they make frequent forays into our very close neighborhood, and that's again a source of concern because they get support in Pakistan, sometimes in Sri Lanka and Myanmar. Let me quickly come to our own Navy's blueprint. Despite the fact that I mentioned, that the Navy's budget is smallest of the three services. It's about 12 to 13% of the whole defense budget. But by careful planning and vision and foresight, and mainly through indigenous production, the Navy is very proud that we focused very sharply on indigenous production. We will have a fleet of about 170 to 180 ships and 400 aircraft in the next 10 to 12 years, which makes the Indian Navy one of the more competent and more capable navies in the world. Now, the Navy, as you know, uniquely operates in all three dimensions: in the air, on the surface of the sea, and underwater. So we've carefully planned so that all three dimensions of naval capability move together. Today we have a potent force mix of destroyers, frigates, corvettes, and support ships. Most of them are missile armed and capable of multiple roles. They can look after anti-aircraft, anti-ship, anti-submarine threats. We have a submarine arm, quite small, relatively small compared to China, compared to Pakistan and especially China, but we are enlarging it. We are building submarines right here in Mumbai, and so soon we hope to have a sizable force of submarines. We also have a large naval aviation component, naval aviation force, which has two components. One is shore-based, which does reconnaissance, patrol, and so on, and the other is based on an aircraft carrier, which carries fighters for strike and anti-aircraft capability. And almost every ship of the Navy carries a helicopter on board. As I mentioned, the Navy is very proud of the fact that we are very, very much self-reliant in the sense that most of our ships, submarines, aircraft carriers, including our nuclear submarines, have been built in India by our own shipyards. We have 4 shipyards, one in Bombay, one in Cochin, one in Visakhapatnam, and one in Calcutta, and they are continuously adding to our Navy's strength. And a matter of great pride for our shipbuilding industry is that we are making our first aircraft carrier in Cochin. It should be ready in a few years' time. Now, thank you for that applause. Now, while it's a matter of great pride that we build all our ships in India, it's also a matter of concern that what goes inside these ships, the weapons, the sensors, much of that is still imported because we have, technology-wise, we have still to catch up with much. In fact, the strange fact is that India has become a great aspirant to great power status. We are a nuclear power, we are a military power, we are also an economic power. But industrially, we've lagged behind, and I'm sure there are many captains of industry who are Rotarians, and this is something of concern to us. Unless we become industrially capable, our defense will remain relatively hollow. I mentioned coastal security, and since you're all Mumbaiites, this is a matter of concern. But to reassure you, since 26/11, in the 12 years that have elapsed, much has changed as far as coastal security is concerned, and I think you can sleep peacefully these days because the Navy and the Coast Guard and many other agencies are looking after your coastal security. The main issue of reassurance is this center called the IMAC, Integrated Maritime Awareness Center, which takes feed from radar stations all along our coastline. All along our coastline, we've installed radars which send their feed and information to a central location in Gurgaon. And there this information is collated so that today, 24/7, somebody in Gurgaon knows what is going on almost all along our coast and in the waters of our coast. And should they detect any unusual activities, either fishing activity or foreign vessels, etc., instant action will be taken by the Navy and the Coast Guard. So that's a matter of great satisfaction for the Navy. Just a quick word about our nuclear submarines. It's a matter of interest for everyone. Now, strategic nuclear deterrence is a part of the Indian Navy's role, that we will maintain a capability to hit an adversary with nuclear weapons should he threaten us. We have no first use, we'll never be the first to use it, but this is just to make sure that no one else attacks us. Now, we have nuclear weapons on land by missile, we have nuclear weapons with the Air Force, but the safest And the most protected nuclear weapon is the one which you put on a submarine, because the submarine goes and dives deep. No one knows where it is. So our naval nuclear deterrence is the safest and most assured. And we have a certain number of submarines which carry nuclear weapons on board, and they can launch those missiles from underwater. And one of them is called INS Arihant. There's another type of nuclear submarine. There's another type of nuclear submarine which is called an attack submarine, which is meant to attack shipping and shore targets. And we have one of that type also that is on lease from Russia. But again, matter of great satisfaction, we are building ourselves, our own design, nuclear submarines of both types, missile armed and attack submarines. And there's a company called L&T, which is playing a major role in the building of our nuclear submarines. Again, a matter of pride. Which brings me to the last issue that I want to dwell upon. Before I close, I want to leave one final reminder that an important component of India's maritime renaissance, we are staying in Hotel Renaissance, so let me talk about that, is the revival of our ancient seafaring skills. I mentioned that thousands of years ago, our forefathers were braving the high seas, traveling thousands of miles, carrying trade, culture, and so on. Today, there are only small fishing boats or trawlers which venture out a few miles out of Mumbai. So the Navy has tried its best to revive the adventurous attitude, the seafaring skills of our young people. So in 2009-10, the Navy sent a young officer called Dilip Donde, Captain Donde, and he became the first Indian to circumnavigate the globe solo, all by himself in a boat. He went right around the world. Donde stopped in 4 ports on the way. He was followed by another young man called Abhilash Tomi. He sailed around the world in 2012-13, around the world non-stop. It's a great feat of human endurance, courage, whatever you may call it. But what really thrilled us was that we collected a team of 6 young women officers, and they sailed around the world. And so that's a matter of great pride. We just saw some very brave women on the stage this morning, women of courage, but these young ladies have shown us the way also. So these ocean voyages are not just a display of human courage, endurance, and fortitude, but they demonstrate that the seafaring skills of Indians are well and alive. And what our forefathers did thousands of years ago, we are capable of doing, repeating all that again. So which brings me to the end. I started with a reminder of our glorious maritime past and of the weaknesses that crept in subsequently, resulting in domination by foreign powers. Our maritime security suffered neglect for many decades because of sea blindness. So part of my aim this morning was to ensure that you don't suffer from the same malady. Today's maritime environment is more hazardous, and our dependence on the seas is far more critical than it has ever been. If there's some interruption in our trade and energy resources, our economy will be jolted badly. Recent developments on our land borders, as well as the larger Indo-Pacific, has served to remind us sharply of this. We have a strong, balanced, and professional Navy, which will in due course of time, in a decade or so, help in taking India to its place amongst major world powers. However, it is necessary that our decision makers understand that the Navy by itself is only one component of the country's maritime power. There are other components like our ports and harbors, our shipbuilding industry, our fishing industry, and undersea resources, which also need to be looked at very, very closely. And only when we take care of all these aspects will we be able to call ourselves truly a maritime power. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Jai Hind.
Commander Ahluwalia, can I please invite you on the dais? Friends, aren't we proud of our armed forces, the Army, Navy, and Air Force? Amongst the best in the world. A matter of immense pride for all of us. Yes, that's the applause they deserve. On behalf of District 3141, Rotary International District 3141 is pleased to honor Admiral Retired Arun Prakash and confers upon him Super Achievers Award for his invaluable contribution as a naval aviator, his dedication to one of the largest naval fleets for 4 decades, and for his coveted decoration for chivalry in the defense of his country. 8th and 9th of February, Umang, DISCON, Larry, Nahajit.